Welcome to codeunparalled. In our last video, we talked about dependency injection and the repository pattern. We were able to create an in-memory list, which was like our database. In this video, we intend to take it a step further and connect to an actual database. And our database of choice is going to be SQL Server. But make no mistake, any other popular database works. It's supported, be it SQL or NoSQL. All right. Now we can talk about databases without talking about one special guy called an ORM, an object relational mapper. Now you might ask, what does it do? Okay, so as a developer, you learn things to do with your language. If it's C#, you understand what classes are. You understand OOP. You know what a list is. You know how to go through a list. You know how to find something in a list. You're already familiar with this language, be it Java, be it PHP. You know how to loop through lists. You know how to loop through arrays. Now, what ORM does is it tells you, what if I give you access to a database in form of a list, for instance, in form of an object? Can you loop through it? Can you do the same things you do the list? Can you add something? Can you remove? Can you replace? So an ORM just gives you a database, but lets you use the language you already understand. Okay, so you don't have to understand what SQL is. You can just pretend like you're working with a list, and you'll be able to do whatever you do to a list, to a database. All right. Besides that, ORM also help you to create databases. For instance, in our case, we're going to use what we call the code first approach. So we're going to use our prescription class to create for us a prescription table. All right. So they also help you create that. Besides that, they can also, if you've got a database, they can also go to your database and then scrabble through it and create for you classes, which then you're going to interact with them to affect the database. All right. So that's what ORMs actually do, and they save you time. They are easy because you are using the language you're already familiar with, and it's easy to onboard new developers because you don't have to understand the proprietary SQL language, right? So the ORM that we're going to use in this tutorial is Entity Framework Core 6. All right, this is built by Microsoft. There's one I love, it's called Dapper, but for this video we're going to use Entity Framework Core. All right, so for us to use Entity Framework Core, what do we need? Okay, so we need at least about 4 dependencies. We need the Entity Framework Core itself, and this should be version 6. You need design tools and SQL Server. You see that the one for SQL Server here just enables you to use the SQL Server database. If you're using Postgres, you're going to use the Postgres extension. The tools and design, those help you with things like migrations, creating and making a database. All right, so those will be the dependencies that we'll need in our application. All right, but for us to do this thing efficiently, we need to have a game plan. So what are we going to do? Okay, number one is we're going to create a database context. All right, now if you look at this previous diagram here, we have this database context over there. All right, this database context is more like now a window through which we get into Entity Framework Core. It's a portal which gives access for us to go into Entity Framework Core, and this database context is specific to Entity Framework Core. If we were to use Dapper, there wouldn't be a context there. All right, so the first thing we need to do is to create the context. Once we create the context, then we need to inherit from the DB context class. This will now give us the features rather that we need to play around with the database. Okay, the third one, then we need to give it the models which it needs to work with. I said ORMs help you play around with the database, but you need to have a class, a model which mirrors that. So we have to give it that model for it to play around with. Then the fourth step is we're going to connect it to the database. At this point in time, you see that the database is somewhere else and your API is somewhere else. You need to have a connection string, which will be a path to point your application to the database. Okay. Then we also need to set up what we call configuration. You see, you're building this application on your machine. but you eventually want to deploy it to maybe the cloud. You will need to set configurations which are not specific to your machine but rather to the cloud. So you need to have a file that allows you to dynamically change without really recompiling your code, right? So think of it as where you put your constants. Okay, then we have to register the database service. Like we said, we have a dependency injection container in .NET, so we need to register the database service at one place so that wherever we use it, we have just told the container we're going to use enter from a call. Then number 7, we're going to run migrations. These will create our database since we're starting from the code going towards the database. So this is going to create for us the database. Then from there, we're going to implement the repository using AFCO. Now we already have this repository, but it uses an in-memory database. Now I want to swap that and use the actual enter from a code that goes to the database. All right, let's proceed to code. So here we are in Visual Studio, and for those who want to follow along and code later, I'm going to provide the GitHub link in the description, so don't worry about that. So where were we? We had our repository which has the following functions, and we had our in-memory repository which implemented we did just 2. We just did the get. Now we want to implement the same repository but now point to Entity Framework and talk to an actual database. But rule number 1 is we need to create a database context. So under the folder of modules is data. Under data folder, create a class. So add class. Now you can call it whatever you want, but for the sake of standard, you're going to put prescription data context so that people can actually relate that that's the context. So number 1 is to create a context. Number 2 was to inherit from the DB context class. So we're going to make sure it inherits from the DB context class. All right. We've done that. Now it's going to bring an error because we haven't brought entity framework call into this file. So control dot. Then it's going to bring in suggestions. Then we're going to select entity framework call using there. Okay. All right. Then we need to bring a constructor, which is we use a CTOL snippet. It will create for your constructor. Now it takes what we call a database a DB context options, and this context options just takes the class which you want to use, and in this case this is our class. I'm going to give it that, and people just call it options. All right, and we want to inherit from the actual base class of the database context. Okay, and I have this AI. I think it's a tool by Visual Studio. Sometimes it auto completes. Yours might not do, but it's always good to code along. Okay, so we have done the context. We have inherited the context. Now we have to provide the modules that we need for migration. Now ours is a simple database. We're just playing around with the prescription. And if you look at a prescription, it's just one model. It has an ID, the patient name, the amount, and the frequency, right? So this is the table we want them to create for us. All right, so we want to give them that table. So it becomes, now that table becomes a property in this class. All right, so when it comes to this class, it will see that property, it will get that property, and it will make for you a table. Right, so we want to put prop, another snippet, but we're going to use a DB set. All right, so because we want a DB set. But what DB set for? So it's a DB set for prescription. Okay, then we've got prescriptions. All right, so what have we done? It's going to create a table. The table will be called prescription, right? So we have done number 3. We've given it the modules we want for migration. If we had, let's say, if our module is complex, we had prescription, maybe we had the doctor table, we would put all of them under here. So if there are 4, it would create 4 tables. Now our next step is to provide a connection path to the database, right? So how do we do that? We've talked about we need to link our API to find where our database resides. Now I have noticed that some people might have SQL Server installed on the system, and I didn't want that to be a drawback. So we're going to use the built-in by Visual Studio. So you're going to click View, then there should be SQL Server Object Explorer. We are going to use that. All right, we are going to use that. So you are sorted on that front. All right. Now we need to provide that path. Okay, so we're going to do it now. Okay. Go to app settings.json. So this is where the constants are. These are where your configurations are. Okay, these ones can change. Okay, so I want you to go there and create for us. So it's key pair value. It's a JSON file. So you give it a key and its value. Okay, so a key in this scenario, it's going to be a connection string. Okay, that's our key. All right. Within that, we want to give it the location of where the database is. Now it's kind of long. I'll just copy and paste. Should you have problems, you can always find it on the GitHub repo or online. These things are everywhere. What are we saying? So we brought this name. So the name of this object and this property in this object is called default connection. Keep that in mind. We're saying server should be local DB. This one points to the database that's within the Visual Studio. What should be the database name? In our case, we can call that we'll call that prescription. Okay, prescription DB, for instance. Trust connection is equal to true. This one is going to bypass. It will bypass your credentials. It's going to go true. You might have a problem on the server. You have to bring in username and password. But for now, this will suffice. So we're saying, give us a local database, call it prescription, and trust its connection. Right? Fair enough. So we've done the database. Okay. Now we have to set up the configuration to use that connection. We have put this here. Okay. But our application doesn't know. So we have to set up the application in a way that it should be able to get that connection string, right? Now, we're going to talk about dependency injection again here. So you have to register that service in your dependency injection container. So we use the configuration class to handle things of this sort. So you have to go back to the program.cs class, and we have to register that dependency. So I'll put a comment. This is the dependency for the app settings JSON, for instance, app settings JSON. Okay, so we agreed to use the builder first. So we're going to use builder. Then you need to call the services. Then you're going to say, okay, my mistake. Things have changed in Java 6. So what you need here is to bring around the configuration manager. All right. Yeah, that's the thing with coding. You just can never get used to these things. So you're gonna bring the configuration manager, and then just click configuration. Now you wanna bind this configuration to your builder. All right. So what have we done? We've said this builder here, attached to it the configuration. Okay. Then this object here is going to give us access to the settings file to go and get our database connection string. All right. There we go. So we have done that. The next thing is for us to register the database service. Again, we're going to use dependency injection all over the application. All right. Hence, we need to tell our dependency injection container that there will be entity framing call in this application. So wherever we're going to use it, there will be no need to re-register. It's one place. All right. So we need to register our database. All right. So we've done our configurations. Now let us say registering our database. Okay. All right. So this is kind of hard at first, but once you know how to register services, it's just seamless. So for this, we're gonna get the builder class. We're gonna get services. Now we want to use a DB context. Now a DB context also takes in the context you want to use. Okay, so it's possible to have multiple contexts in an application. You can register them all, but this one you're trying to give it which one do you want to play with, which context should you give access to SQL Server. So our context is called what? Prescription data context, so we're going to give it that. All right, so give it there. Now you need to use the configuration here to point to, because it will expect to have a string of connection. So you use this configuration to go access here. All right. So we're gonna have a function of the fly. Oh, sorry about that. And what am I touching? So we're gonna have a function of the fly that is going to enable us to get that. Okay. So opt dot. We want to use SQL Server. All right, and that SQL Server is going to take in your configuration, which is there, and just tell it to get you the connection string, and the connection string will need to get the actual name of your file. So here it's saying get this configuration, okay, this manager here. Once you get the configuration, inside the configuration you're going to find connection string here. I want you to get me that. Okay, once you get me that connection string, which is this one, inside that object there is something called default connection. All right, so you're going to give it default connection. Okay, so all we're saying here is add the context, add the prescription context, and use SQL Server in that context, and get me a connection string. Get me a connection string which resides in the default connection. All right, if you do that, we have added our database. Okay, then from there we have to run our migration. Okay, now before we run the migration, I want you to notice a few things. First thing, check the prescription. You see there what we call data annotations. You've got the key. This key tells Entity Framework that that's a primary key. All right, if you put key here and here, it will be a composite primary key. All right, if you say this thing is required, it means it can't be null. All right, if you say the maximum length of patient name should be 100, then you're saying that string in your database should not be null, shouldn't be more than 100 characters. Okay, so once you've done that, I have to run our migration. All right, so go to Tools, NuGet Package Manager, and Package Manager Console. All right. Where is that? So Tools, NuGet Package Manager, Package Manager Console. All right. If I can just bring it up. Oh, that would be nice. All right. So it will be something like this. You're gonna get PM. Now for you to add a migration, you're gonna start with the word add/migration. And call it whatever you want to call. For the first one, people usually call it initial migration, but your database is going to change over time. So you could add things like added column table, things like that. So add migration and click enter, and something's going to happen. So it's building here. I want you to pay attention to this side where the folders are. Boom! You'll see there's a folder called migrations there. All right. Let me just minimize this. Okay, but something interesting has happened. There's a class that has been created. It's called initial migration. Okay, so it takes the migration name and it inherits from migration. You see the two methods. There's one, it's called method app. Okay, what is it doing? You're creating a table. It's called prescriptions. And if you notice here, you will see that the ID is SQL Server identity, which means it's going to auto increment. If you look at the patient's name, it's saying string, and it's saying n varchar 100. The the maximum we had actually defined. And you see that nullable is false. All right, so it knows based on the data annotations. Okay, then you've got the constraint there. It's also adding the primary key on its own. Again, you see, I don't have to know what a database works like. If I know how my classes talk to each other, I don't even have to know what SQL does. All right, I'm not saying you shouldn't know, but I'm just saying. Then there's a down method, right, which drops the table. And if you look at the package manage console, you see that it says remove migration. If you run this command, it's going to run the down function and it's going to drop your table. Now this is not final. For it to be final, you have to bring a command called update database. Right? If you do update database, it's going to build again and it's going to now affect the database. Now all these are warnings to do with things like amount, which are it's saying it's not properly done. But again, I'm not trying to teach entity framework here. I'm just trying to show you how it delays. Okay, things like this can be done at an entity framework core series. So if you want it, you can also comment in the description. We can do that. Now we see that it's created 2 tables, and if we go to view, then if you go to SQL Server Object Explorer, you see that you can refresh. Then you can go to databases and you see there's a prescription DB there. It's been created. All right, and it should have 2 tables, and I'll tell you why. If you think there's 1 table, it's going to have 2 tables. And the first one would be the prescription table, which is this one. The other one would be the migration table. So it creates a table to track the migrations. Okay, it's very, very important as a safeguard. So we have successfully created our prescription table. If you click it and click view data, it's going to be empty. It's going to be empty, and we can put in just data to use to test if we're really connected. So this could be John Doe. Amount could be $350. Frequency 2. Press enter. This could be Jane Doe. And you notice that you can put there because it's auto increment, so it knows what to do. There's no need for you to give it the ID. We have Jane Doe. 200. Frequency is 6 times a day. All right, so we've put in sample data to test. Now we have run our migrations. Now the last step for us is to implement the entity framework into our application. All right, so let's do that. You will notice that we have this interface here which says, if you want to use me, I want you to give me these functionalities, right? So we're going to create a class of entity framework that inherits from this repository and implements the functionality. So under data, I want you to create a class called you can call it prescription repository. All right, and this class should inherit from the iPrescription repository. All right, and it has to throw an error because it expects you to implement those. So if you go there and click control dot, you have to implement those interfaces. There we are. All right, interesting. Now this class depends on entity framework. There is a dependency, so we need to inject the dependency within our constructor. All right, if you watched the last video, this should be straightforward. If you haven't, click on top there and go check that out. So we're going to create our context class. All right, because that's what we depend on now, the database context. So private read only. That class was called what? It was called, if I can remember, it was called iPrescription data context. I'll just cover it from there. So, oh my god. Okay, so the class was called prescription data context, and we're gonna have an object of context. Okay, so we can have constructor dependency injection without a constructor. So you're going to do ctor, and then it will also expect to have an object. Okay, in this case we're going to call it context, and we're going to new up the context. All right, so here we are. We have said go to the program class, we have said, and now we have said this is where we registered our in-memory class, right? We said if you see this in our code, please use this. But now we're swapping that to use entity framework. So it means here we're going to have none other than the prescription class. So all we had to do was register the dependency at one place, just here in the container, that if you see this part anywhere in our code, use this class. All right, and then if we come to this repository, if we use this, it will know that there's this, then I'm going to use that class. So we've done that already. Now what's remaining is for us to implement. Now for this class, we're going to implement the gets only. All right, so we've got get all. All right, now this is how entity framework works. It's so easy. For us to get everything, all we do is, obviously we have to return. We're going to get our context. One dot, what's the name of your table? Dot, our table is called what? Prescriptions. And then just send that to a list, and that's it. You see, I haven't written any SQL query saying select star where. No, just by saying context dot prescriptions, everything comes. I don't even have to worry about how SQL works. All right, now let's also try to implement the get one. Okay, and what do? Simple. You're going to return. You're going to say I want my context, go to the prescriptions table, but now we want to get a specific ID in our table. All you do is there's a function called first or default, and all it does is returns the first element of a sequence if the element is there. All right, first or default. Now we're going to use the lambda expression where I'm going to say get me, it's saying it could be null. We're saying this is a lambda expression. If you know C#, it should be straightforward. You're saying get me p.id, where this ID is equal to that, right? Because now it knows that in this prescription there's that ID. All right, and you're done. All right, now if we go to our controller, you see that repository is we already registered it. All right, and there's no need to change this. That's why we said the pattern of repository allows you to change at one place. So all we did was go to our program class and just say, well, go use this one, and our controller will use that one. There's no need to change code all over the place. All right, now there's one way to find out this. We're going to test our API to see if we are really talking to the database. And remember, we have created two entries, Jane Doe and John Doe. So I'm going to press Control F5 and see if really we're able to talk to the database. So all right, so here we are. If we click get there and click try it out, if you click execute, you see that it goes and it gets John and Jane Doe. Now, yes, I apologize, this video has been so long, but we have successfully managed to talk to a database. Okay, so in the next video we're going to talk about what we call data transfer objects. They are very, very crucial as far as the model is concerned. Once we finish that, we're going to proceed to how we can add, search, and do everything else to the database. If you've been with me this far, thank you very much. If you like the content, like, subscribe, and comment if you will. Thanks a lot.